Where is the civil engineering industry headed in the future? In today's episode, I have with me KP Reddy. KP is the CEO and founder of Scalable Ventures. He's also a civil engineer and an entrepreneur. And KP advises CEOs at top civil and infrastructure firms around the globe. He's about to publish his third book. And in this episode, he gives some very specific tips that civil and infrastructure firms will need to listen to and implement if they want to stay ahead of the curve and be one of the leading organizations in the industry today and beyond. Let's jump right in with KP. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Check out Tensar Plus,
the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. It leverages our decades of research and experience with soils all over the world, so you can count on your solutions working the first time, even in the most difficult conditions. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Specs, reports, and product data can be generated for your design, and training resources, research, and our third-party expert reviews are all provided conveniently in the software if needed. Usable both online and offline, the app is available in browser and on all major mobile platforms. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
All right, I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Today, I have with me KP Reddy. KP is the founder and CEO of Scalable Ventures. And KP, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So KP, you've had an interesting career from a civil engineer to an entrepreneur, kind of and beyond. So take us a little bit through your journey and kind of how you got to be doing what you're doing today and what that is.
Yeah. So I think it's, I'm a second generation civil engineer, and my dad bought an IBM PC when I was 13 with no other mission other than this is going to change everything for engineering. So he bought it and then asked me to figure it out. Fortunately, my mom was a software programmer, so I learned kind of self-taught writing code on that and helping him convert pieces of paper and books and all and tables into structural engineering analysis software. And so that was my first exposure to kind of technology. Then fast forward, I'm at Georgia Tech doing civil engineering because I felt like I already knew how to write code, so why would I get a computer science degree? Right. So did that, and my professor there said, hey, there's this thing called the internet, and here's a Mosaic browser and this thing called HTML. I want you to put all my class notes on the internet. And so that was my first exposure to the internet. And then from there, went and worked in actual engineering for a while. And then on the side, I was building websites and writing software. And then my side hustle was making more than my main hustle, which, in civil engineering isn't that difficult, especially back then. So then basically it had built some software that I thought there was a market for and quit my day job and built that company. And that took a few pivots, and we went public, and that was very successful, and that gave me some, I would say optionality on what I wanted to do next. So built a couple more startups from there, one in the BIM space, and then kind of semi-retired. Took a couple years off, and Georgia Tech's president asked me to come run the incubator. And so I went did that for a while, and that's when I got interested in doing something again. And really, it was like a lot of inspiration from friends of mine in the engineering industry, people like Tom Scarangello and Ray D'Adazio and Scott Frank over at JB&B and Dilip Chowdhury over at Walter P. Moore, that were all friends that said, hey, I think our industry is going through kind of a technology revolution. Can you help us come figure it out? And so I did some consulting for all of them, and then that turned into me not wanting to build a consulting company and started a venture fund. So those were some of my initial backers. We just closed our second fund, and we'll have 120 so kind of engineering, construction, building product companies backing our fund. And at Shadow Ventures, we invest in seed stage, typically pre-revenue companies that are tech companies is what we fund. So we usually write checks $1 to $2 million. We generally lead rounds, but highly supported by my investor base, which is, it's not everyone, but it's a lot.
Wow. So that's a pretty interesting career journey, if you will. I mean, I know civil engineers that I've talked to that are interested, have some entrepreneurship background, kind of gotten into the business side of their consulting firms. But for you, having that experience at Georgia Tech, I'm sure kind of really opened your eyes and gave you that kind of business, even some finance experience, which got you down the road you're going to now. And, you deal with a lot of leaders in a lot of firms. You probably talk about hiring trends. And what are the traits, what are the characteristics that these firms are looking for in civil engineers in the world we live in today? Because it's much different probably than when you and I graduated as a civil engineer.
Yeah, I think there's a big shift away from, I think the core skills, you have to know how to do basic engineering stuff and use the software packages and that kind of stuff. But I think it's the intangibles that they're really trying to identify, which is, intellectual curiosity, creativity, communication skills, this idea that you get to be an engineer and sit behind your computer and not talk to anyone isn't really a real thing anymore. Because even if you're not leaving the office, you're probably on Zoom calls, right? And so I think part of what they're seeing is people that are very committed to the industry, that are committed to the vision. It's a challenge because, it's a tough market. There's more civil engineering jobs than ever before. There's fewer kids kind of graduating and fewer are staying, right? They'd rather maybe go work at a construction company and make more money or go work at a real estate developer. And so I think a lot of what they're seeing is because civil engineering is such an apprenticeship business, really people that are committed to kind of being in the business and wanting to impact the world the way civil engineers get to. So I think that's been the big focus. And then, especially when it comes to innovation and technology, they really want to know that these people are curious.
Yeah. And that's exactly kind of where I want to go next with you. I mean, you're constantly talking with leaders of civil infrastructure firms all across, globally, quite frankly. And what have you seen in regards to AI and kind of how firms are or aren't adapting to it? And how do you think it's going to affect us here going forward from what you've seen and heard?
Yeah, I think there isn't a firm that is not doing something with AI right now. And the story I always say is AI is the latest technology to end up on the CEO's phone. The last one might have been the BlackBerry.
Right.
There were no CEOs saying, oh my gosh, 3D parametric modeling, load that on my machine. I want to play with that. It just didn't happen. Whereas, you look at the BlackBerry, they saw other executives on the golf course with one and they went back to their IT department and said, hey, I need one of those. Every CEO I know right now has ChatGPT or whatever on their phone. They are playing with it. They are using it. And they kind of see it. They see this vision of where this technology could go. So they're really starting to get their teams exploring it, playing with it, building things with it. It's quite fascinating how fast this is moving. I've never seen anything move this fast in our industry, literally ever.
Mm-hmm. That's wild.
So I think it's going to be a game changer because you look at so much of what we do as engineers. We have spreadsheets that have been highly templated. We use software that does a lot of calculations for us. There's a lot of stuff we do that we were already kind of automating. So the leap from automation to being AI-driven isn't that big of a leap. And then if you look at on the research side, whether it be building codes, et cetera, most of that's starting to get embedded in the AI engines. So, I mean, we're probably less than a year away that you're not Googling much of anything. You're going into a chatbot and asking it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I know that, one of the things in the civil engineering world that I kind of laugh at is that for years people said everyone has to work at their desk in the office. Nobody can work remotely. And then, COVID comes and it was almost like overnight, the whole industry is remote, 100%, right? And all these firms are working remotely. And so I always thought that was interesting because to me, it was kind of like lack of flexibility in our industry. But now people are doing it. And now you're in this situation where some firms are doing more in person, some firms are still hybrid, some firms have a lot more remote. What's your sense from the leadership that you've talked to, from the people that you communicate with on this kind of hybrid work environment? Obviously, AI is tied into this, but do you feel like it's something that will probably continue? Do you hear firms saying we'd like to get more interaction of people together? Like, what is that looking like, or what are you hearing about that?
Yeah, I think there's some bifurcation a little bit around like leadership versus management versus entry level. I'm still very involved at Georgia Tech, and when I talk to younger engineers, they all want to be in the office. They want to be around the senior people and learn. They don't want to be on an island being told remotely via Slack or Teams or whatever, oh, go do this, right? They are really craving, like I said at the beginning, we're an apprenticeship industry. So whereas other industries where maybe young people graduating want to be able to be remote, like that's a non-starter for them. I think in our industry, it's the exact opposite. I think the younger people will choose a firm that has a great culture and has the ability to be in person, and they get to be around people to learn from. I think the senior people are fine with being in the office. Quite honestly, I think it's the middle section, the middle layer of the cake, so to speak, that is struggling with it because whether, their kids are at a certain age, so whether it's whether it's childcare, whether it's extracurriculars, whatever, this remote work has been really beneficial for people. The couples both working, they have carpools, they have this, they have that, ballet. I think it's that middle layer that is really struggling with the in-person and needs the flexibility. I think some of your more senior leadership, they're empty nesters. If they don't come into the office, they probably won't see anyone for weeks, or they're traveling, right? Or they're traveling a good bit. So I think that's one kind of persona. And then the junior people is the other persona where they kind of want to be in the mix. They want to learn, they want to understand. And so I think that's the gap there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to think of it, right? As from the career demographic, or from the, where in your career are you? Because I agree with you 100% that if you're a recent graduate, if you're an intern, it's almost a disservice if you're remote, because you're not getting those like water cooler conversations, going out to lunch with people, soaking everything up like a sponge, which is so critical in our industry. Like you said, that apprenticeship model. But then again, you get to that point in the middle of your career where you do have the young kids, and now you've been home with COVID, and now you're like, this is great. It's much easier. It's flexible. Mm-hmm. The two parents can work back and forth. So it's an interesting model, which is why I do think that most likely a lot of these consulting firms are going to remain flexible. You kind of have to in the industry room because, it's so competitive hiring people, right? You kind of got to have that on your resume that you're flexible.
Yeah, I think also for the younger folks, they're getting exposure to the C-suite and the VP level that they would never have because they're in the office with the chairman and they're at the break room and they run into the CEO to get coffee, and they're the only two people in the room because everybody else is working remotely. So they're actually getting really good executive time with executives, which is great. To be 20-something years old and be hanging out with executives, it's kind of a dream.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can learn more in one lunch than you've learned in the past 4 years about how to grow your career. Yeah, so that's interesting. So, if your firm, depending on if you're listening, your firm may have some flexibility, or you may be in charge or helping to map out what that looks like from your firm. I think you really need to take into account the different ages or experience levels of your professionals and have that flexibility kind of built in. I think that's like really, really important, because if it's not, then you're in trouble, basically, because you can't lose people because of that.
There is one other dynamic we've seen on the remote work side, which is kind of interesting, is letting people work wherever they want to, and then kind of mandating that, well, I'll let you work from Nashville, Tennessee, even though we don't have an office there.
Right.
But you are required to engage with community. And so you're starting to see these little micro clusters where that engineer that's all alone in Nashville working remotely ends up getting a project in that market. And, so it's a great like business development thing where if you have people in market, because so much of civil engineering, there's the big mega projects, but a lot of these projects are you have to be kind of in the community, so to speak. And so there's firms that would have never thought about having an office in Charleston, South Carolina, but a couple people moved there during the pandemic and decided to stay there. And now they're getting work out of Charleston. So.
Yeah. It's a great point. It's kind of like it's removed some of your geographic limitations with hiring, and it's really opened up your pool from what you can hire out of, which in our industry is really important because the pool isn't that big. So if you can expand the pool and the companies, I think it goes back, KP, to what you talked about with the AI, companies that are willing to adopt the right tools to be able to have people work at high speeds from anywhere that they want to, can now open up their resource pool, which is something that can be very valuable. And which kind of leads me into the next question I have for you. What have you seen with US-based firms regarding utilizing like international freelancers? Is that something that's common? Have you seen that happening? Because I feel like that could be where we're going more.
It's really common. And, it was always something that was going on. We have an office in India. They're doing some work there locally, but they also support us in the US. That's been going on for decades, ever since Tom Friedman wrote The World is Flat. Everybody decided they needed offshore resources. But the effectiveness has been tough over the years. And what I've seen is during the pandemic and remote working and the labor shortage, people have said, maybe the reason it wasn't working outsourcing to India or Vietnam or having remote people, it wasn't them. It was really my ability to manage people remote. And so now, with the hybrid work environment, I've gotten much better at managing things remotely. So now why wouldn't I hire someone in another country for a third of the price? And by the way, I have so much work, it's not even about the price. It's just about resourcing. And if you think about it, if you asked executives a year before the pandemic about doing a Zoom call, they would have been like, what the hell is that? Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so now you have CEOs that are working from their second home, doing Zoom calls or team calls to their group. So just that alone has gotten people a lot more comfortable with this remote work environment. So if you're saying remote work, then why does it matter where that person is?
Yeah, for sure. Sure. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which we've seen a lot of in our industry, is private equity getting involved, right? Coming in and investing in these civil infrastructure consulting firms. A lot of people out there don't understand this or what this means. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of, give an overview, a basic overview of what it means if like a private equity company were to invest in your firm or the firm you work for and what that looks like. Because I've been involved with some of these companies, and it's definitely interesting, and it's definitely becomes a different atmosphere for people in the company, the leadership in the company, but a lot of young civil engineers that might be listening, they don't even know what that means.
Yeah, I think I think there's one thing to really understand is that generally civil engineers, firms start with a couple partners, they get a couple customers, they leave a big firm, they get a couple customers, and they start building a firm brick by brick. And then 30 years later, they have a 1,200 person firm, and they maybe did some things like employee ownership, which essentially means you're buying in. So some of these ESOPs and employee-owned firms, in order for the people at the top to retire, it requires people at the bottom to buy their stock. So I've always kind of said the way employee ownership has worked in our industry is a bit of a Ponzi scheme, right? I can't get out till I send it to you, sell it to you. I'm going to sell it to you for more than I paid for it so I can leave. And then you're going to do the same thing to the next person, right? And I think one of the shifts that's happened is, one, people aren't staying at one firm for very long. Two, ask someone in their 20s if they want to buy into a firm. That's it. They're not that interested. They're trading public company stocks. They're doing Bitcoin. They're doing all kinds of things. They really view their investing as a separate thing from their job. And so there's not a huge appetite there. So what that's really, it's been a forcing function in order for people at the top to move on and retire, for them to be transfer of equity. It's left a position for these private equity groups to come in and buy firms and buy out everyone. So these are financial companies that come in, they buy the entire firm, and now they don't do it out of some goodness of their heart. They want to make money. And so typically a lot of their model is how do we buy a company that's generating 10 million in cash flow. We paid X for it. And now we're going to put process and procedure in place for it to make more money. And then when it gets to a certain point where it makes more money, we're going to sell it to another private equity group that's interested in it. And so it's a constant trading of these firms. And so where a lot of that does shift is there's a big focus on growth. There's a big focus on financial discipline. And when I talk to the private equity groups, one of the things that they've told me is that it's really great buying these engineering firms because they already have a lot of that. There's actually not that much fat to cut. There's not that much optimization. There's a little bit of professionalization, like of the financial systems and accounting and stuff like that. And in fact, a lot of times they're pushing these firms to invest more in marketing and HR and really, taking a 1,000-person firm and trying to get them to start looking and feeling like a 10,000-person firm, because that's where they want them to grow to. And so a lot of the PE folks I've talked to, they love investing in these companies because engineers by nature understand math. They're pretty frugal. Most of these firm leaders have been through multiple economic cycles. They're very quick to lay people off if they need to. A big project gets lost. They look at utilization. They're tracking time. That may not be the same as maybe a marketing agency where they maybe don't have the math discipline. And so the PE firms love our industry because we're pretty disciplined and we keep an eye out for the cycles. And then we really adjust staffing based on demand. We're very good at it.
So these private equity firms, KP, you gave a couple of reasons, of course, that they're interested in our industry. We're professionals who are very regimented, we're very focused, we're very streamlined, which they like, of course. But how about the industry in general and how that's attracting them, meaning the economy, the economics, the infrastructure funding bill that's throwing a lot of money in our industry? It seems right now that every time you pop up, there's a new technology, there's a new software company for civil engineers, for infrastructure firms. It seems like there's kind of a crosshair of a couple different things happening, making this industry super attractive right now.
No, there's definitely some macro trends, right? Macro trends like our aging infrastructure. And, what people don't realize is we have a terribly aging infrastructure that needs a lot of work. And whether that funding comes through federal programs, right? Or honestly, just through sheer maintenance, right? If a bridge fails, you got to build it's just, whether we like it or not, our aging infrastructure has to be fixed. We're either going to be proactive at it and get ahead of the curve, or we're going to react to it and pay 10 times as much. And so there's macro trends where we have such a crumbling infrastructure, quite honestly, that they see that as a macro trend. You look at things like energy transition, whether it be EV charging stations, whether it be manufacturing of new, of nuclear power plants, making it come back. You're starting to see these enter solar farms, et cetera. You're seeing some big trends there that are these macro trends that you need engineers for all that. And then you look at things like housing shortage, et cetera. We still cannot create enough inventory of homes, and it's just going to keep, they see all these macro trends. And then I would say the other thing that they start to see is not just new projects, but also maintaining and managing existing infrastructure. And then on top of all that, we don't have enough talent. Right. So it's kind of a perfect storm. And so they see that and they go this is a massive opportunity with operators that know what they're doing.
Yeah. And one thing I'll just say, just to be clear, if you work for a firm that private equity owns the firm, it can be a very good opportunity for people working in these firms too, because we have a couple clients who are owned by private equity and they really are investing in those firms. So you may have the best software available, they're streamlining your processes. So, when we talk about this, I think there could, like anything, there's probably benefits and risks to having private equity own your firm and not, right? So you can look at it from either side of the fence. So I don't want to say that one side is better than the other. I think for you as a professional, if you do work for a private equity firm, there's going to be some aspects that are going to be beneficial for you that you may be able to find some opportunity in which I think you should keep in mind as you grow your career.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen post-private equity investment over the next 3 years, there's a lot of attrition, right? Some of it is people get enough money from the transactions that they go start their own firm, right? Some of it is, I want to go work in a different space, so I'm going to quit and go to another firm, right? So you see a lot of that, just people moving around from firm to firm. Some of the principals make so much money in these transactions, and these are not people that imagined that they would have a second and third home necessarily in their careers, but they're getting a pretty sizable check,
right?
And they're like, I'm done, I'm out of here. And so you're starting to see, after the 3 years or so of being bought by a private equity firm, that you do see a good bit of attrition, and it's just the natural order of things.
Yeah, for sure. So as we wrap up here, KP, the last thing I want to ask you is for those firm leaders, those executives, those CEOs that are maybe listening to the show, from what you've seen in our industry, what message do you have for those firms in terms of what they're going to need to really pay attention to if they want to grow their firm sustainably in this industry for the next, 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think there's a few points. I have a new book coming out called How to Create the Intangible Organization. And a lot of it is studied across industries, including the engineering industry. But I think there's a few things. Leadership has been focused heavily internally versus externally. So I think it's a time, it's not about leading your people as much as it is about leading the market and leading the industry and being a lot more outward facing in how you engage and think about that. So it's about being a leader outside of your firm versus like leading your people internally. Because it's a time to move markets. 2, I think there's only so much engineering work based on the staff you have, so how do you continuously grow? So you have to come up with new products and new services to really grow in a way that the pie is a fixed pie and you can only take so much from your competitors. So you really have to be really good at exploring new ideas and new markets. And some of that is tied to innovation, right? So some of it is tied to innovation. So I think second point being, you got to be good at starting new businesses. The reality is in our industry, none of us that are alive invented anything civil engineering. Right? None of us invented it. All the statements of work look the same. All the proposals look the same because it's an industry that none of us invented. So it's really an era of inventing new services and products. And then I would really say the third thing is really creating a strong vision for your firm and sticking to it. It's not just the sign at the lobby, right? It's not just a thing on the annual report, but really take the time and look critically as a CEO. What is your legacy? What do you want to change globally? What do you want to affect globally? And have a strong vision of that. And I think the CEOs that are more operators focused on the pennies, which is really the CFO and the COO's job, aren't going to get there. They just really aren't going to get there because you really have to be innovative, not just on technology, but as you think about business models. There's so many amazing opportunities, especially with AI. There are so many massive opportunities to really build global firms that are really driving change.
Awesome points. Sounds like, the book is going to be a gem and with a lot of information, which I'm looking forward to. But those couple of points, that last point, we worked with a company in our company and the CEO who I interviewed, she's like, basically what I try to do is lock myself in my office for an hour every morning and think 10 years into the future. Kind of like what you're saying, right? That's the job of a CEO, right? That visionary view, to help to push people to do things that maybe they're not comfortable doing, be adaptable to things that we're not used to adapting to in our industry. So I think that's really awesome. And I really like the first thing you said, because I think a lot of times people will give like the routine answer, which is like, leading your people is really important, which obviously it is. But what you're saying is like leading the market, right? Like getting out there, disrupting, offering a service that may be new. I know we've worked with engineering firms that will create their own software to provide a better service to their client, right? Do something different and innovative. And that's really leading the market, where you want to be the first ones to do that. And some of the firms that we've worked with also, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, will have like pretty robust like innovation committees, like within their organizations, where they're constantly looking at things, reviewing things, because listen, it's overwhelming, no doubt about it. But at the same time, you've got to be on top of it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And you can use that as a conduit for your people and your leadership to do something different. Hey, we want you to review innovations in the industry and meet once a month with a couple people in the firm and report back on, right? Get creative in that way.
I think that the challenge is, the pattern I've seen is most of them are focused on the technical side of innovation, not on business model innovation. And that's really the unlock, right? The unlock is, how do we create new business models? And they really have a huge challenge. I mean, I advise 12 or so CEOs, and it's really a shift for them to think about what businesses they should be in and how they need to think more creatively about business models. And it's not a new thing. They're not used to it. It's mostly been grow through acquisition, grow through adding an existing service line. Oh, let's get into environmental engineering. Everyone knows that. Or it's grow by geography. It's not like, let's go invent a whole new business that's never been invented before. That they've never done.
Yeah, really interesting. It's basically like blind spots, right? Like what you've thought about for all the time leading up to now, you have to completely think in the opposite direction if you want to keep your firm ahead of the pace. And so some of the stuff that KP's doing is really interesting. So once again, I want to thank KP Reddy. KP is CEO of Shadow Ventures. You can check out shadowpartners.co, as well as find KP on LinkedIn. He does a lot of great content. He does a lot of interviews. He's really just got kind of a pulse on the market and the trends in the market. And if you kind of keep an eye on what he's doing, you'll be able to kind of hear some of these trends as we go forward. So KP, thanks so much for taking some time and spending it with here on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with KP. I mean, he is advising top firms around the world. And some of those recommendations that he gave there at the end in terms of how your firm can be a leader in the industry were really awesome, right? Not just leading people, but leading the market. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to our channel. We will put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.